Maria had always been the kind of girl who carried more dreams than money in her pocket. Every morning, she tied her hair into a messy bun, slipped on her faded uniform, and walked quickly to the little cafe on the corner of the busy street. The cafe wasn't fancy. It had squeaky wooden chairs, the smell of old coffee beans, and a bell at the door that rang whenever a customer entered. But for Maria, it was the only place where she could earn enough to keep herself going. Her life was simple, but not easy. She lived in a tiny one-room apartment, with paint peeling off the walls and a leaky ceiling when it rained. The heater barely worked, so in winter nights, she wrapped herself in layers of blankets just to stay warm. Her wardrobe was small, just a few shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, and 1 jacket. That jacket wasn't new, the fabric was worn out, and the zipper sometimes got stuck, but it was her favorite. It had been a gift from her late mother, and every time she wore it, she felt comfort and strength, as if her mother was still by her side. Despite her struggles, Maria never complained. She had learned long ago that complaining didn't change anything. It only made the days feel heavier. So she kept smiling at customers, carrying trays of coffee and plates of food, even when her feet ached and her back hurt from standing all day. Many customers barely noticed her. Some were rude, snapping their fingers when they wanted something, while others ignored her as if she was invisible. But Maria treated them all with the same kindness, always greeting them with a gentle smile. What kept her going was her quiet hope that one day, things might change. She didn't want to be rich or famous. She only wanted a life where she didn't have to worry about every bill, every meal, and every long night when the electricity almost got cut off. At night, after finishing her shift, she often sat by the window of her small apartment, looking out at the city lights. She wondered what it would feel like to live in one of those tall buildings, where warm lights glowed behind curtains and people didn't have to count coins before buying bread. Maria's kindness wasn't just something she showed at work. It was who she was. Once, when she saw a stray cat shivering outside the cafe in the rain, she took off her apron and wrapped the little animal in it until it stopped trembling. Another time, she gave her own lunch sandwich to a homeless boy sitting outside the cafe, even though it meant she would stay hungry until the evening. Her co-workers often teased her, saying, "Maria, you care too much. The world doesn't give back." But she would only smile and reply softly, "Maybe the world doesn't, but I can." Every day began the same way for her. Waking up early, putting on her old shoes, and walking in the cold morning air to the cafe. She would pass by shops with beautiful clothes displayed in their windows, dresses and coats she could never afford. Sometimes she stopped for just a moment to look, imagining how it would feel to wear something elegant. But then she shook off the thought and kept walking, because daydreaming never paid the bills. Maria didn't mind working hard. What hurt her most was how invisible she sometimes felt. People came and went, ordering food, sipping coffee, talking loudly about their lives, but very few actually looked at her. To them, she was just the waitress, someone who carried plates and cleaned tables. But deep down, Maria knew she had a heart bigger than the little life she was living. She believed that kindness mattered, even if no one else noticed. That old jacket of hers was the one thing she never took for granted. Whenever the cold wind blew through the cafe's open door, she pulled it tighter around herself. The fabric was worn thin, but it carried memories of better days. Days when her mother would wrap it around her shoulders, saying, "One day, this world will see the goodness in you, Maria. Never stop being kind." Those words stayed with her, like a secret promise she kept in her heart. On the outside, Maria looked like just another struggling waitress. Her shoes were scuffed, her paycheck barely enough, and her future uncertain. But inside, she carried a quiet strength, a belief that kindness was never wasted. She didn't know it yet, but her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. And it would all begin with the simplest thing she owned. The jacket she wore every day, the jacket that had seen her through her darkest winters, and the jacket she would soon give away without thinking twice. Because that's who Maria was. Even when she had little, she gave. Even when she felt invisible, she made others feel seen. And sometimes, the universe waits for people like her, people who give without expecting, to surprise them with a miracle. The evening was colder than usual. The wind outside howled through the streets, carrying tiny flakes of snow that danced in the air before melting on the ground. Inside the cafe, people rushed in, shaking the chill from their coats and huddling close to the warmth of their coffee cups. The little bell on the door kept ringing as more and more customers came in to escape the storm. The cafe was filled with the sound of clinking cups, soft chatter, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee. Maria, tired from a long day, moved quickly between tables with her usual smile. Her hands were red from the cold, and her thin uniform did little to keep her warm. But she didn't mind. She was used to it. She was happy the cafe was busy because more customers meant more tips, and tips meant she could pay part of her electricity bill that was due in just a few days. As she wiped down a table near the window, she noticed a man sitting alone. He wasn't like the usual customers who came in bundled up in thick coats and scarves. He wore an expensive-looking suit, neatly pressed and perfectly tailored, but it wasn't made for winter. His shoulders were slightly hunched, and every now and then, a small shiver ran through him. His hands, which rested on the table, looked stiff, as if he had been walking outside for too long without gloves. Maria paused for a moment, watching him. His face was calm, but his lips were pale, and his breath was visible in the cold air that sneaked in whenever the cafe door opened. Something about him seemed unusual. He looked like a man who belonged in a warm office or a luxury car, not sitting alone in a small cafe, freezing quietly. She walked over to take his order, and when she stood closer, she could see the shiver in his body even more clearly. He gave her a polite nod and asked softly for a cup of hot coffee. His voice was deep but carried a tiredness, like he had been through a long day. Maria wrote down his order, but her heart tugged at the sight of him. She had seen many customers before, rich, poor, happy, angry, but there was something different about this man. He wasn't loud or demanding. He wasn't rude like some who thought money made them better than her. Instead, he sat quietly, almost blending into the background, except for the fact that he was clearly cold. When she returned with his coffee, she noticed his hands shaking slightly as he reached for the cup. The heat from the coffee seemed to comfort him, but it wasn't enough. Maria stood for a moment, holding her tray against her chest. She thought about her own jacket, the one she had hung by the back door when she started her shift. It wasn't much, it was old, patched, and far from stylish. But it was warm, and right now, warmth was what this man needed. Maria hesitated. She didn't know who he was. Maybe he was a businessman. Maybe just someone passing through. She knew most people would ignore him, thinking, he has money, he'll be fine. But Maria wasn't like most people. She couldn't stand watching someone suffer, even in silence. And she remembered her mother's words, echoing in her mind like they always did, kindness costs nothing, but it means everything. She glanced around the cafe. No one else seemed to notice the man's discomfort. Everyone was too busy with their own conversations, sipping coffee and laughing while the storm outside grew harsher. Maria took a deep breath, then made her decision. She went to the back, took her jacket from the hook, and returned quietly to his table. The man looked up, surprised, as she gently draped the jacket over his shoulders. For a moment, he froze, as if he wasn't sure what to say. Maria gave him a warm smile and said softly, "You look colder than me. Please, keep it on until you're warm." The man blinked, taken aback. People weren't usually kind to him without expecting something in return. In his world, generosity often came with hidden motives. But here was this young waitress, offering the only jacket she owned, without hesitation, without asking who he was or what he could give her in return. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. Instead, he simply nodded, his eyes holding an emotion he hadn't shown in a long time, gratitude. He pulled the jacket around himself, feeling its warmth, but also the warmth of the gesture behind it. Maria didn't linger at his table. She just smiled again and went back to her work, carrying trays and cleaning tables as if nothing unusual had happened. To her, it was simple. Someone was cold, and she had something that could help. That was enough. But for the man sitting by the window, it was far from simple. He watched her as she moved around the cafe, her smile never fading despite the obvious tiredness in her steps. He felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. A reminder of what kindness really looked like when it was pure and unselfish. Outside, the storm raged on, and the streets grew emptier. Inside, the cafe buzzed with warmth and chatter. Yet for that man, the warmth of an old, worn jacket meant more than the heat of the coffee in his cup. And though Maria didn't know it, this single act of kindness was about to change her life forever. Maria didn't think much before she gave away her jacket. To her, kindness had always been something natural, something you do without expecting anything back. The moment she saw the man's pale lips and his hands trembling against the warm cup, she felt a pull in her heart. He looked strong, well-dressed, and rich, but right then, he seemed fragile, like a child lost in the cold. And Maria could never walk past someone who needed help. As she placed her old jacket on his shoulders, she noticed the way he stiffened at first. He wasn't used to people treating him like this, not without a reason. Most of his life, people offered things because of his wealth or his power. There was always a hidden expectation, a favor, an introduction, money. But Maria didn't even ask his name. She didn't lean closer with curiosity about who he was. She simply smiled and said, "You look colder than me. Please keep it on until you're warm." Her voice was soft, almost casual, as though giving her only jacket was the most ordinary thing in the world. She didn't realize how extraordinary it really was. The man wrapped the jacket tighter around himself. It wasn't stylish. The fabric was faded, the edges frayed, the zipper a little stubborn. But it carried warmth, a kind of warmth he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just the fabric, it was the intention, the care behind it. He looked up at her, trying to say thank you, but the words got caught in his throat. For someone who commanded boardrooms and spoke with power every day, it was strange to feel speechless over such a simple act. Maria didn't linger. She didn't want to embarrass him by standing there. She just gave a quick smile and returned to her other tables, balancing trays and taking orders as if nothing unusual had happened. To her, it was just a moment. One more act of kindness in a life where she tried to be kind even when the world wasn't kind to her. But for the man, that moment stretched in his mind. He sipped his coffee slowly, watching her move around the cafe. She was quick on her feet, moving between tables with ease, even though her shoes looked worn out and thin for such a cold day. She bent down to speak gently to an old lady who was struggling with her bag, carried extra napkins to a family without them asking, and gave a friendly smile to a young couple arguing over a menu. None of these things were part of her job description. Yet, she did them as if they mattered deeply. The man thought about his own world. People around him wore expensive suits and diamonds, spoke in polished voices, and shook hands with smiles that never reached their eyes. He lived surrounded by wealth, yet there was always a coldness in the air, the kind that no heater or luxury coat could fix. But here, in a small cafe with squeaky chairs and a waitress in a faded uniform, he felt something rare, genuine warmth. Maria glanced at him once or twice as she worked, making sure he was okay. But she never asked for the jacket back. She never hovered near him, waiting for praise. She simply went about her shift, her focus split between dozens of small tasks. Her generosity was quiet, unannounced, and unselfish. As time passed, the jacket started to warm him, and the trembling in his hands eased. He leaned back in his chair, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. In that simple jacket, he felt more cared for than in any of the luxury hotels he had stayed in. It reminded him of a time long ago, when his mother had wrapped her own coat around him during a snowy night, whispering, "You first. Always you first." That memory had been buried under years of business, wealth, and responsibility. But tonight, because of Maria, it returned. Maria didn't know any of this. For her, it was just another busy evening. She was tired, her feet hurt, and she was already thinking about the long walk home she would have to take later, in the biting cold, without her jacket. But she didn't regret it. She never regretted helping someone, even if it cost her comfort. At one point, as she was refilling cups at another table, one of her co-workers leaned close and whispered, "Maria, are you crazy?" That jacket is all you have for the walk home. Why give it to him? He looks rich enough to buy 10 of them. Maria just shrugged and answered quietly, maybe he can buy 10 jackets, but right now, he doesn't have one. And I do. The coworker shook her head in disbelief, muttering something about Maria being too soft-hearted. But Maria only smiled. She didn't believe kindness made her weak. She believed it made her stronger than most. Back at the table by the window, the man ran his fingers across the jacket's fabric, thoughtful. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had given him something without strings attached. It was such a small gesture, yet it felt immense. He knew instantly that he wouldn't forget this night, or the waitress who gave him warmth when she had so little herself. He watched her laugh softly with a child at another table, the sound light and genuine. He realized then that true richness wasn't in money or status. It was in having a heart like hers, one that gave freely. Maria didn't know it yet, but her act of kindness was about to set off a chain of events that would change her life forever. That old jacket, the one she thought was only fabric and memory, had become something much more. It had become a bridge between her world of struggle and his world of power. And though neither of them could see the future, one thing was certain. Kindness had begun a story that money alone could never write. The cafe grew quieter as the night went on. One by one, the customers finished their meals and left, pulling their coats tightly around themselves before stepping into the freezing air outside. The storm was still raging, the wind rattling the windows and making the bell on the door ring louder each time someone pushed it open. Maria, tired but still smiling, moved from table to table, clearing empty cups and wiping down surfaces. Her mind was already half on the long walk home she would have to make later, without her jacket. The man by the window sat silently, sipping the last of his coffee. He had been there for almost an hour, but he hadn't said much, only a quiet thank you when Maria placed her jacket over his shoulders earlier. Now, he seemed deep in thought, his eyes fixed on the swirling snow outside, though his mind was clearly elsewhere. The warmth of the jacket had spread through his body, but the warmth in his heart came from something far greater than fabric. It came from the kindness behind it. Maria noticed him glancing at her now and then, as if he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. She didn't press him. She never pushed customers into talking more than they wished. She respected their space, their silence. To her, he was just another person who had needed a little help, nothing more. She continued her work with the same energy she gave to every customer. When his cup was empty, he stood up slowly. He didn't take off the jacket right away. For a brief moment, he simply held it close, as if memorizing the feeling of comfort it carried. Then, with care, he slipped it off and placed it neatly over the back of the chair. His hands lingered on it for a second longer, before he straightened his posture and picked up his wallet. Maria walked toward him, ready to clear his table. She expected nothing unusual, maybe a polite thank you, maybe just a nod. What she didn't expect was the small folded note he slipped under the cup before placing a few crisp bills on the saucer. He looked at her, his eyes holding an expression she couldn't quite read. Part gratitude, part something deeper, as if he wanted to say 100 things but chose silence instead. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice steady but soft. It was only 2 words, yet they carried more weight than she could understand. Maria gave him her usual gentle smile. "I'm glad you're warm now," she replied, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. To her, it really hadn't. She had given her jacket because someone needed it. That was all. The man gave a small nod, then turned and walked toward the door. The bell rang softly as he stepped out into the storm, his figure quickly swallowed by the falling snow. For a long moment, Maria stood by the table, staring at the empty chair where he had sat today. Then she shook herself out of her thoughts and began clearing the cup and saucer. It was only then that she noticed the note. Curious, she picked it up and unfolded it. The handwriting was neat, elegant, almost old-fashioned. The words were simple: "Your kindness will not be forgotten." Maria blinked at the note, unsure what to think. She had received tips before, sometimes generous ones, but rarely a message like this. She slipped the note into her apron pocket and continued working, not realizing how significant it would one day become. Her coworker, who had been watching from across the room, came over and raised an eyebrow. "Strange guy, wasn't he?" she said. "Didn't talk much. Just sat there, shivering in that fancy suit." Maria shrugged. "He seemed nice," she replied softly. "Nice?" the coworker scoffed. "He looked like one of those rich men who never even notice people like us. Funny, though, he noticed you." Maria didn't answer. She didn't like gossip or assumptions. People were people to her, no matter how rich or poor. She tucked the note away and finished her shift. Later that night, when the cafe finally closed, Maria stepped outside into the icy wind. She pulled her thin uniform tighter around herself, shivering as the cold bit into her skin. Every step home felt harder without her jacket, but she didn't regret what she had done. Her mother's words echoed in her heart, reminding her that kindness always mattered. She thought briefly of the man walking out into the snow. Maybe he would go to a warm home, maybe to a hotel. Maybe she would never see him again. The world was big, and people crossed paths only to disappear sometimes. She accepted that. To her, what mattered wasn't whether he remembered her, but that for one moment, he hadn't been cold anymore. Yet, unknown to Maria, the man walked away with far more than the memory of borrowed warmth. In his pocket was the image of a waitress who gave away the little she had without hesitation. In his heart was a promise he had silently made, that he would not let her act of kindness fade into the background of his busy, powerful life. Maria had no idea that her simple gesture had planted a seed. A seed that, within days, would grow into something so unexpected, so life-changing, that it would turn her ordinary world upside down. But that night, she only knew the silence of her footsteps on the snowy street, the cold wrapping around her like a test of endurance, and the faint comfort of a note in her pocket, reminding her that even the smallest kindness never truly disappears. The next 2 days passed like any other in Maria's life. She worked long shifts at the cafe, running between tables with a tired but polite smile, counting coins carefully when she paid for groceries, and shivering each night on her walk home without her jacket. Her co-workers noticed her discomfort and asked why she didn't take it back from the man, but Maria only shrugged. "He needed it more than I did in that moment," she said softly. To her, the matter was finished. She never expected anything more to come from that night. But life sometimes hides its biggest surprises in the most ordinary days. On the third afternoon, as the cafe buzzed with its usual crowd, a shiny black car pulled up outside. Its polished surface reflected the gray winter sky, and its presence seemed out of place in the small, modest neighborhood. Customers by the window leaned closer, whispering as the car door opened and a tall man in a dark coat stepped out. He carried himself with quiet confidence, and behind him, another figure followed, neatly dressed and holding a leather folder. The bell above the cafe door jingled, and the room fell unusually quiet for a moment as the men walked in. Maria, balancing a tray of steaming cups, looked up and froze. Her heart skipped when she recognized the first man. It was him. The same man she had given her jacket to. But tonight, he looked different. He was no longer shivering, no longer just another quiet customer at the window. His presence filled the small cafe in a way that made people sit straighter and watch curiously. Maria's hands trembled slightly as she set the tray down at another table. She didn't know why he had come back. Perhaps to return her jacket? Perhaps just to say thank you again? She quickly wiped her hands on her apron and approached, her voice polite but uncertain. "Good evening. Can I get you something?" The man smiled gently, and for the first time, she noticed how calm and steady his eyes were. "No coffee tonight," he said. "I came here for you." Maria blinked, confused. "For me?" she repeated. She glanced nervously around, aware that the entire cafe had gone almost silent, all eyes on them. "Yes," he said simply. Then, as if sensing her unease, he added softly, "Don't be afraid. I just want to thank you properly." Before Maria could respond, the second person stepped forward. He was well-dressed, polished, the kind of man who looked like he belonged in expensive offices. He opened the folder in his hand and spoke with a formal tone. "This is Mr. Alexander Grant," he announced. one of the city's most respected philanthropists and one of the most successful businessmen in the country. Maria's mouth went dry. She stared at the man, Alexander, trying to match the image of the freezing stranger in her jacket with the title she had just heard. She had given her jacket to a billionaire? It didn't make sense. In her world, billionaires existed on television, in magazines, far away from her life of broken shoes and second-hand clothes. Yet here he was, standing in the small cafe where she worked every day, looking at her with gratitude rather than pride. Her coworker nearly dropped a tray when she realized who he was. Customers began whispering louder, some pulling out their phones to take discreet pictures. Maria felt heat rise in her cheeks. She wanted to hide, but Alexander's gaze was steady, reassuring. "You gave me something no one else has given me in a long time," Alexander said. His voice carried through the cafe, calm but strong. "Not money, not power, not connections, just kindness. Pure, simple kindness." He paused, then added with a small smile, "And a jacket that meant more than any luxury coat I own." Maria didn't know what to say. Her instincts pushed her to brush it off, to insist it was nothing. But before she could speak, the second man stepped aside, and another figure entered through the cafe door. A woman this time, elegant, graceful, dressed in a designer coat that seemed to belong on the cover of a fashion magazine. Gasps rippled through the cafe as people recognized her. She was Isabella Laurent, one of the most famous fashion designers in the world. Her work was admired across continents, her clothes worn by celebrities, her name whispered like a legend in the fashion industry. And now, she was walking toward Maria, her eyes shining with curiosity and warmth. Maria felt her knees weaken. She clutched her apron, not sure whether she was dreaming. Why would someone like Isabella Laurent be in her little cafe? Alexander spoke again, his eyes still on Maria. "When I told Isabella your story, she was deeply moved. She wanted to meet you herself." Maria's heart raced. Her story? She hadn't done anything special. She had just given away her jacket. She looked at Isabella, who was now standing directly in front of her, smiling kindly. "You gave away the only warmth you had," Isabella said softly. "That is something rare, something beautiful. People like you inspire me." She reached out, gently taking Maria's hand. "And I want to give something back to you." Maria shook her head quickly, her voice trembling. "No, please, I don't need anything. I didn't do it for." But Isabella squeezed her hand and interrupted. "Kindness should always be honored. You may not think you deserve it, but you do." The cafe was silent, everyone holding their breath as if waiting for what would happen next. Maria felt as though she had stepped into another world, one where billionaires remembered her and world-famous designers wanted to thank her. She wanted to pinch herself, to wake up, but the warmth of Isabella's hand and the steady gaze of Alexander told her it was real. Maria didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of a transformation she could never have imagined. Her life, which had always been small, simple, and unnoticed, was about to step into a spotlight she never asked for but would change everything. That night, in a tiny cafe filled with whispers and astonished faces, a waitress who once felt invisible learned that her quiet act of kindness had not only been seen, it had been remembered, cherished, and about to be rewarded in ways she never dreamed possible. Maria's heart beat so loudly in her chest that she thought the whole cafe could hear it. Standing before her was Isabella Laurent, a woman she had only ever seen on television or in glossy magazines at the supermarket. Maria could not believe that someone so important, someone whose clothes were admired by movie stars and queens, was now holding her hand gently, as if Maria was the special one. The other customers whispered among themselves, their eyes wide with shock and excitement. Maria felt the heat in her cheeks as all attention focused on her. She wished for a moment that she could slip away quietly into the kitchen, but Isabella's warm smile anchored her in place. "Maria," Isabella said softly, "when Alexander told me your story, I couldn't stop thinking about it. You gave away the only jacket you had, without asking for anything in return. That kind of generosity is rare in this world. And it touched me deeply." Maria shook her head quickly. "It wasn't a big thing," she said nervously. "He was cold, and I had something to give. Anyone would have done the same. But Alexander, standing just behind Isabella, spoke firmly. No, Maria. Not everyone would have done what you did. That's what makes it special. Maria lowered her eyes, her fingers twisting the fabric of her apron. She wasn't used to praise. She wasn't used to being noticed at all. For years she had lived quietly, invisible among the wealthy customers who dined at the cafe. And now, suddenly, she was at the center of attention, her kindness being described as if it was something extraordinary. Isabella's eyes sparkled as she continued. I believe that people like you deserve to be celebrated. So I want to do something for you, something that comes from my own heart and work. Maria blinked in confusion. Do something for me, she repeated. She didn't understand. Yes, Isabella said with a nod. I want to create a wardrobe for you. Clothes designed especially for you, not just for your body but for your spirit. I want you to feel the beauty that the rest of us can already see in you. The cafe gasped as if Isabella had announced she was giving Maria the moon. A wardrobe from Isabella Laurent was something only the richest could dream of. Each dress she designed cost more than Maria earned in a year. And yet, here she was, offering it to a waitress who owned only a handful of second-hand shirts. Maria felt dizzy. She shook her head in disbelief. No, I can't accept that. Please, I don't need fancy clothes. I'm just a waitress. Isabella squeezed her hand gently, her voice calm but strong. You are not just anything. You are someone who gave selflessly. That deserves recognition. Kindness should be dressed in beauty. Let me do this for you. Tears welled up in Maria's eyes. She had never thought of herself as beautiful. Her life had been about survival, paying bills, working long hours, keeping her little apartment together. She never imagined herself in elegant dresses or tailored coats. That world belonged to others, not to her. But Isabella spoke with such sincerity that Maria's heart trembled. The famous designer wasn't looking at her uniform, or her tired face, or her rough hands. She was looking deeper, at something Maria didn't even see in herself. Alexander stepped closer then, his voice low and warm. Maria, sometimes life has a way of rewarding us when we least expect it. You gave without thinking of yourself. Now it is our turn to give to you. Please, don't refuse this gift. It comes from gratitude, not pity. Maria looked between them, at Alexander's steady gaze and Isabella's kind smile. Her throat felt tight, and her words came out in a whisper. I don't know what to say. Isabella smiled. Say yes. The cafe was silent, everyone waiting. Finally, Maria nodded slowly, her tears spilling over. Yes, she whispered. Thank you. The customers burst into quiet applause, touched by the moment. Maria covered her face for a second, overwhelmed, while Isabella pulled her into a gentle embrace. From that day on, everything began to change. Isabella's team arrived at Maria's small apartment the following week with measuring tapes, sketches, and fabrics so soft that Maria had never even imagined their existence. They treated her with respect, asking her what colors she liked, what styles made her feel comfortable. For the first time in her life, Maria was not invisible. She was being seen, valued, and celebrated. Each piece that Isabella designed for her told a story, of kindness, of strength, of quiet dignity. There were elegant dresses that made Maria feel like she was walking in a dream, coats that wrapped her in warmth so different from her old jacket, and shoes that made her stand taller, more confident. When Maria looked at herself in the mirror, she hardly recognized the reflection. The tired waitress was still there, but now she looked like someone who belonged in a brighter world. Someone worthy of being noticed. Someone who mattered. Yet deep inside, Maria remained the same. She never let the luxury change her heart. She continued to smile at customers, to help the elderly lady with her heavy bag, to share food with the stray cat outside. Because Maria knew that kindness wasn't about what you wore. It was about who you were. Still, every time she put on one of Isabella's creations, she felt a new strength inside her. Not because of the fabric, but because she finally understood that her small acts of goodness had power. They could reach hearts, change lives, and even bring billionaires and world-famous designers into a tiny cafe on a snowy night. And as she folded her old jacket and placed it carefully in her closet, she whispered a quiet thank you. That jacket had carried her through the hardest winters of her life. But giving it away had brought her into a new season, one filled with warmth she never expected, and a beauty she finally began to see in herself. Maria stood in front of the tall mirror, her hands trembling as she smoothed down the fabric of the dress she wore. It shimmered softly under the cafe's warm light, every stitch perfectly made for her. She had never worn anything so beautiful in her life. The person staring back at her did not look like the tired waitress who once walked home at night in an old jacket. She looked like someone new, someone with hope shining in her eyes. When Isabella's team first brought her the clothes, Maria had been shy. She had laughed nervously, saying, "These are too fine for me." But they had reassured her with kind smiles. And when she finally slipped into the first gown, her heart had nearly stopped. It was not just the beauty of the fabric, it was how it made her feel. For the first time in her life, she felt important. News of Maria's transformation spread quickly. Neighbors who had once overlooked her now greeted her with smiles and respect. Customers at the cafe whispered when she walked past, unable to believe this was the same woman who had once served them in faded aprons. Some even asked her for advice about fashion, thinking she must be someone special to be noticed by Isabella Laurent herself. Maria felt strange about all the attention. She was still the same girl inside. She still lived in her small apartment, still walked the same streets, still worked long shifts at the cafe. But now, when she wore Isabella's creations, she carried herself differently. She stood taller. She smiled more. She no longer avoided her reflection in shop windows, she looked at it with pride. One evening, Alexander invited her to a charity event. Maria almost refused. "I don't belong there," she said. "That world is not mine." But Alexander shook his head. "Maria, kindness has no class or status. You belong wherever your heart takes you. And your heart deserves to be celebrated." With Isabella's encouragement, Maria agreed. That night, dressed in a breathtaking gown, she entered a hall filled with chandeliers, music, and wealthy people in jewels and designer suits. She felt nervous at first, her hands gripping the edges of her clutch bag. But then she noticed the way people looked at her, not with pity, but with admiration. Some whispered her story, others approached her to shake her hand. "She's the girl who gave her jacket," one woman whispered with a smile. "Such a pure heart." Maria realized in that moment that people weren't impressed by her dress or her new wardrobe. They were touched by the simple kindness she had shown that night in the cafe. Her story had traveled far, reminding people that compassion still existed in the world. The night was filled with moments Maria never imagined. She spoke with artists, business leaders, and even a few celebrities who had once worn Isabella's gowns. They all told her how inspiring her story was. Maria blushed at every compliment, feeling shy but grateful. When she returned to the cafe the next day, her co-workers were waiting for her with wide eyes. "Maria, you looked like a queen last night," one of them exclaimed, showing her a picture from the newspaper. Maria laughed nervously, shaking her head. "I'm no queen. I'm still Maria." But inside, she felt a warmth that she couldn't hide. For the first time in her life, she truly believed she was worth something. Her life began to transform in more ways than she expected. Strangers visited the cafe just to meet her, to see the waitress who had touched a billionaire's heart. Some left kind notes, others slipped small gifts into her tip jar. A little girl once handed her a drawing of a woman giving away a jacket, with the words, "You are my hero." That simple gesture moved Maria more than any dress could. She also noticed how her own confidence grew. When customers were rude, she no longer shrank back in silence. She spoke kindly but firmly. When her boss needed help training a new worker, Maria stepped up without hesitation. Slowly, she became a leader in her little cafe, someone others looked up to. Yet Maria never let the luxury control her. She still wore her old clothes at home. She still helped her neighbors carry groceries. She still offered food to the stray cat by the alley. She never forgot where she came from, or the struggles she had faced. The beautiful clothes didn't erase her past. They simply gave her the strength to believe in a brighter future. And deep down, Maria knew that the greatest transformation wasn't in her wardrobe. It was in her heart. She had discovered that her kindness had power, that even a small act could ripple into something much bigger. She learned that when you give without expecting anything back, the world has a way of giving to you in return. One quiet night, Maria opened her closet and looked at the old jacket, the one she had once given away. She touched the worn fabric with her fingers and smiled. That jacket had changed her life. It had carried her through hard times, and when she finally gave it away, it had opened the door to a new beginning. Tears filled her eyes, but this time they were tears of gratitude, not sadness. She whispered softly, "Thank you," to the jacket, to Isabella, to Alexander, and to life itself. Maria had gone from a struggling waitress with nothing but hope to a woman who now carried herself with pride and grace. Her transformation was not about wealth or fame. It was about finally seeing her own worth, and realizing that one small act of kindness could light up the darkest night. And so, each morning when she put on one of Isabella's creations, Maria did not just wear a dress. She wore her story, her strength, and the reminder that kindness had the power to transform not only her life, but the lives of everyone it touched. Maria often sat by her small window at night, looking at the city lights glowing in the distance. Life had changed so much in such a short time that sometimes she wondered if it was all just a dream. Only a few weeks ago, she had been working long hours in her old uniform, saving every coin just to pay rent. She had nothing fancy, nothing special, only her smile, her hard-working hands, and her little jacket. That single act of giving it away had brought her into a life she never imagined. But Maria never forgot who she really was. Even though her closet was now filled with gowns, coats, and shoes designed just for her, she still kept her old jacket neatly folded on a shelf. It was more valuable to her than all the expensive clothes because it reminded her where everything began. Every time she looked at it, she remembered that kindness was stronger than money, fame, or beauty. People often told her she was lucky. Strangers came to the cafe just to see her, some even asking for photos or autographs after reading about her story. But Maria didn't see herself as lucky. She saw herself as blessed, not because she had luxury clothes, but because she had learned something far greater. One small act of compassion can change a person's whole future. Whenever she walked down the street now, she noticed how differently people treated her. Neighbors smiled more, strangers opened doors for her, and children waved when they saw her. But Maria also knew the truth. This kindness had always been possible, only people needed a reminder. Her story gave them that reminder. At the cafe, she worked with the same energy as before, but now with even more joy. She would greet every customer with warmth, no matter if they were rich or poor. She knew better than anyone that appearances meant nothing. The man she once thought was just another customer had turned out to be a billionaire. Life could surprise anyone. One day, an elderly woman entered the cafe, shivering in the cold. She wore an old scarf and her hands trembled as she held her cup of tea. Maria saw her and immediately remembered that night when Alexander had been shivering at the same cafe window. Without hesitation, Maria removed her own coat, the one Isabella had designed for her, and gently wrapped it around the woman's shoulders. The woman's eyes filled with tears. "My dear, I can't take this. It looks far too expensive." Maria smiled softly. "It's only fabric. What matters is that you're warm." In that moment, Maria understood the full meaning of her journey. The clothes, the attention, the respect, all of it was temporary. But kindness, the kind that came from the heart, was eternal. It was something you carried with you no matter what you wore or where you lived. As weeks turned into months, Maria became an example for others. The story of the waitress who gave away her jacket was shared across the city, then in other places too. People wrote letters to her, saying how her kindness inspired them to help a neighbor, to share food with the poor, or to be more patient with strangers. She realized she had become part of something bigger than herself. Maria never thought of herself as a hero. She was still just a simple girl who worked in a cafe. But she had learned that being a hero didn't mean having money, fame, or power. It meant choosing to do the right thing, even when no one was watching, even when you had little to give. One evening, Alexander visited the cafe again. He watched her serve customers with the same gentle smile, the same humility as before. Later, when they spoke quietly at her table, he said, "Maria, do you realize what you've done? You've reminded people that kindness is not dead. That's something no amount of money can buy." Maria lowered her eyes, shy as always. "I only gave away a jacket," she whispered. Alexander smiled. "Yes, and in doing so, you gave away warmth, hope, and love. That is far greater than you realize." Those words stayed with her. Whenever she doubted herself, she remembered that even the smallest actions could carry great meaning. She no longer wished for a different life, because she understood that her life, just as it was, had a purpose. As time passed, Maria continued to balance her new world with her old one. She wore Isabella's gowns to special events, but she also wore simple clothes to the cafe. She moved gracefully between both lives, but her heart never changed. She never looked down on anyone, because she knew how it felt to be overlooked. Sometimes, she caught young girls staring at her with admiration. They whispered, "That's Maria, the waitress who helped a stranger." And Maria always smiled back, hoping they understood the real lesson. Beauty fades, wealth can vanish, but kindness leaves a mark forever. On a quiet night, Maria once again stood by her window. She held her old jacket close, breathing in the faint smell of memories still clinging to it. A soft smile touched her lips as she whispered, "It all began with you." She thought of the freezing man, the billionaire's gratitude, Isabella's generosity, and the love she had received from so many strangers since then. But most of all, she thought of the choice she made in that simple moment, to help without expecting anything in return. That was the lesson she wanted the world to remember. That kindness should not depend on wealth, beauty, or recognition. True kindness was pure, quiet, and powerful. And sometimes, when you gave it freely, life found a way to bring it back to you in ways you could never imagine. Maria's life was forever changed, but not because of the luxury wardrobe, not because of the fame. It was changed because she discovered that the smallest act of compassion could carry the power to transform everything. And from that day on, she promised herself to never stop giving, no matter how small the gesture. Because she knew now, more than ever, that kindness was the greatest gift of all.